Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
In our respective corners of North America today.
I only got home last night, dude.
Yeah, you've been in Russia, right?
I have been in Russia, yes. In Yakutsk.
Yakutsk.
Yes. And I don't know if you ever watched Game of Thrones, but anybody has. I swear to you, saw Castle Black there. Like the inspiration for the big ice wall and stuff, it's in Siberia.
Did you stay in an ice hotel?
I did not. I stayed in a perfectly normal hotel. Then it was perfectly normal. But we did go out on the Lena River and went to a place called the Lena Pillars Park, which is a UNESCO site.
Wow.
And it was the river was frozen, maybe 3 or 4 meters of ice on it.
Wow.
So they use it as a road.
Yep.
And it was amazing. It was beautiful. And saw a really cool group of startups and hackers and coders in a place you just wouldn't expect them.
That's awesome. I have some news.
Hit me.
Do you remember last year when people know that I've been following this ketogenic way of eating and have reversed type 2 diabetes and lost about 80 pounds over the last couple of years? And it's been great. And a lot of other developers have heard about it on .NET Rocks and come over and listen to my other podcast, Two Keto Dudes. And last year we did a Keto Fest festival in New London, right where I live, and did a Kickstarter to raise money. Well, we've done another Kickstarter for Keto Fest 2018, and we raised twice as much money. We're going to have twice as much content.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we raised about $91,000 on Kickstarter in 30 days, and now KetoFest.com points to a new website where you can just go buy tickets and come. And it's got a fasting Friday. So if you're into fasting, anything like that, there's going to be support for that all day. On Friday, then there's a social Saturday where we're going to have like a pig roast and turn the restaurants ketogenic, do cooking, live cooking demonstrations and tastings, wine tasting, cheese making, barbecuing, like all sorts of great stuff. And then on Science Sunday, we have a proper list of lecturers in 2 locations. And these are the movers and shakers and thought leaders in the area. So if you're interested in that, go to ketofest.com. That's it.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, and it's time for the segment called Better Know a Framework.
Awesome. All right, dude, what do you got?
You know, it's reminiscent of the Google Weirdos song. Do you remember the Google Weirdos song?
Yes. There's a song you haven't put on the show in a decade.
Oh, we should call Rory and see what's up, and maybe he could come on and do a Google Weirdos from time to time.
My goodness.
All right.
That'd be something.
All right, well, today I've got a blog post, which I think is sort of germane to what Steve Smith is going to be talking about. It's by Samir Buna, and it's called The Mistakes I Made as a Beginner Programmer.
Nice.
And I'm just going to list them, and of course he goes into detail in the blog post, but number 1, writing code without planning. Number 2, planning too much before writing code. I can hear Steve smiling. Number 3, underestimating the importance of code quality. Number 4, picking the first solution. 5, not quitting. 6, not Googling. 7, not using encapsulation. 8, planning for the unknown. 9, not using the right data structures. And 10, making existing code worse. And I'm sure Steve has got a lot to comment on about all of these things because you guys are in the same space, headspace anyway, right now. So that's what I got. It's a great blog post. Highly recommend reading it top to bottom. And thank you, Samir, for writing it.
Awesome.
So who's talking to us today, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1494 from back in November of 2017, not that long ago, talking about developer tips and design patterns with one Stephen Smith. Maybe you heard of him. Lots of comments on that show, but that's not unusual. Steve usually engenders a ton of comments from the show. And this particular comment's a good one. So it's just from a few months ago. It says, "Hey guys, this is from Jonathan Ayub. I enjoyed listening to your show. The test builder pattern is something that I came across a couple of years ago. Mark Seaman points out that instead of creating and maintaining a bunch of test builders, you might want to consider automating the task of building classes. Mark created a framework called AutoFixture, which allows you to build test data and classes that you are testing with a fluent interface. This framework allows you to decouple your tests from constructors of the objects you are building because the framework instantiates those objects for you. In the case where you want to build it or create an object with data that has a named use case, like creating a customer with an invalid zip code, I suppose you could still create a test builder with a method to construct that invalid customer, but I could use AutoFixture under the hood. You would still be creating a builder, but it would remove a lot of the boilerplate code involved. And he includes a link to the article from Mark Seaman and to AutoFixture itself.
Awesome.
Which is all good. And I would point out that our guest commented earlier today, so obviously he was doing his homework, getting ready for the show, where he said that AutoFixture is a good tool to check out. Definitely. I would recommend that developers get comfortable with building their test data themselves so they understand what's going on, and then look to use tools like AutoFixture to simplify the effort involved if they think it's worthwhile, which I'll let Steve comment further on that, I'm sure, since I just stole his comment from his own mouth. Jonathan, thank you so much for your comment, and I will include those links in the show notes. And .NET Rocks mug is on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. We don't plan too much before we retweet them.
When you say too much, you mean not at all.
Not at all. All right. It's time to bring back to the show Mr. Steve Smith. He's an entrepreneur and software developer with a passion for building quality software as effectively as possible. He's published several courses on Pluralsight covering DDD, solid, design patterns, and software architecture. Steve is a Microsoft MVP, a frequent speaker at developer conferences, an author, and a trainer, and one of the founders of DevIQ, a training technology company focused on improving software development teams. You can follow Steve online at ardalis.com, that's ARDALIS.com, or at ardalis on Twitter. Welcome back, Steve.
Hi, Carl. Hi, Richard. How's it going?
Hey, man.
It's good.
It's good.
How are
It's
you?
good to be back.
We just saw each other at Dev Intersection, right?
That's right. That was a good show.
Great
That
show.
was a good show. Yeah, good fun.
I had a good turnout for my workshop on DDD with ASP.NET Core and a couple of sessions, one of which was actually on clean architecture. So I've got all this fresh in my mind.
Yeah. We'd really originally contemplated doing it on the at the show itself, but just timing was hard.
Hey, I know you didn't have a chance to read that blog post, but what did you think of Samer's list of things that he did, mistakes that he made as a beginner programmer?
I thought that was great. I actually did read it myself separately from you pointing it out last week or 2 weeks ago. It's similar. Some of it, like the Googling part, are similar to a post I put up on Hacker Noon called Working Through Roadblocks, a Guide for New Programmers. And that got a lot of well, for me anyway, it got a lot of shares and likes. So folks that haven't seen that, they might want to check that out.
Yeah, very good. So what are you working on these days, my friend? What are you thinking about?
I am working on an update for my architecture book from Microsoft, which I think we linked to in the past show. But it's out there. It's developing applications with ASP.NET Core and Azure, and it covers architecture and a little bit of design patterns that are helpful, and basically shows how to build a maintainable ASP.NET Core application that you can then host in Azure if you want, because this is Microsoft's ebook. It's published on their site, and you can download it for free as a PDF. But you don't have to use Azure to get benefit from reading the book. All the principles and everything that it covers would work just fine if you were hosting it yourself or on some other cloud provider.
Yeah, very good. And you're thinking about clean architecture these days. I mean, you've always sort of thought about clean architecture, but is there anything new in that space that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think it's gotten easier to do it that way, to code things in a way that encourages strong cohesion and low coupling, except where it makes sense. And for me, I've always been fascinated by this particular topic, especially because when I first was becoming, my job title at the time, I think, was like senior developer or senior consultant or something. And I first started speaking at conferences. My very first conference talk was on N-tier architecture.
Wow.
And now, that was the recommended best practice coming out of Microsoft and on all the MSDN articles back in the day. And now that's kind of what I'm trying to convince clients to get away from and kind of flip over on its head.
Yeah.
And so that idea isn't terribly new. I think articles on it have been written over the last 15 years. But there's still, if I go to a conference talk like I did, at Dev Intersection and ask people to raise their hands that organize their solution as, a UI project that references a business logic layer project that references a data access layer project, that's at least half the hands go up in the room.
Sure.
And that approach tends to lead to a lot of tight coupling to your infrastructure and especially your database.
I think a lot of people have this idea that if they're going to separate everything into units that act as standalone components, that it's going to add so much time to our development cycles that, we're not going to bother. We're not going to bother separating. We're not going to bother to do MVVM if we're building desktop apps or even, view models when we're building, JavaScript front ends. So what do you say to that?
It depends on what you're building. I mean, as a consultant for many years, my go-to response is it depends. But, I usually start with the simplest thing that can possibly work.
Yeah.
And then I fix it, as I need to, right? As you keep on investing in the project, the need for additional abstractions or patterns, architectural principles that should be followed, like the separation of concerns principle that you mentioned, they get more and more important. You don't need a lot of that when you're writing Hello World. You start to need a lot of that when you have a project that's got, half a dozen developers working on it for 6 months.
And especially if you need to test any of those components independent of each other.
Yeah, definitely. There's a great book on testing legacy software by Michael Feathers.
The classic.
Yes. Yep. Working effectively with legacy code. It's not just about testing, but one of the points he makes is that your code should have many seams where you can break it apart to test individual units. And code that doesn't follow these types of principles tends to have very few seams. In fact, the only seam it might have is that you can run it and then see what comes out the other end.
And he's big on this whole creating a testable space around that code, like finding a way to be able to test it and have some confidence that you know what's going on.
Yes. In fact, one of the definitions he has in that book that I remember now, which is great, is that, what is legacy code? Well, his definition is legacy code is code that doesn't have tests.
Right.
So you could be writing legacy code right now.
Well, and, or may not be testable in its architecture, right? I mean, a lot of legacy apps that we've encountered tend to cram everything into as few files as source code files as possible, right? Because that sounds like it's, seems on the surface like it's going to be more manageable.
Right. Yeah. And it
turns out not
when you look at the project, if it's only got 2 or 3 files in it, well, you don't have to scrounge around very much in the folder structure to find where the file is that you need.
Right.
You just have to scroll vertically through thousands of lines of code to find the actual piece that you're looking for.
Yeah, we have grep tools for finding source code on disk, but ultimately it should be up in a source control area like GitHub or Visual Studio Teams system where you can just search online. You can just search for it, whatever you're looking for.
Certainly.
Yeah. And you can certainly search across Visual Studio as well.
And the tooling for that has gotten so much better.
Yeah.
There have always been plugins and add-ins and other extensions that you could use that would help. But Visual Studio 2017 now has great support for that kind of thing. To just be able to easily navigate to any given file or type or method inside of your code base.
So you just think it's the tooling has gotten so much better now that it's just easier to do this, or we have fewer excuses?
That I would say that's true. Coding in a way that leverages the solid principles and allows you to build loosely coupled applications tends to require that you do a lot of working with interfaces and dependency injection using the strategy design pattern. And so you end up writing a lot of constructors that take in some interface type that you then want to map to a local field in a class, let's say. And now Visual Studio has, for a couple versions now, has support where you can do that with their tooltip helper. And so my go-to keyboard shortcut is to type CTOR tab to build the constructor, and then immediately I can type in the interface I want and give it whatever name, and then hit Control Dot, and it'll pop up and say, "Oh, do you want me to initialize a field based on this thing?" And I'll select that and hit Enter, and it does. And so instead of having to type 30 or 40 characters of the constructor and the field and everything else in the assignment, it does it all in I have to type 8 characters. And so for something like that, that just reduces the friction, right? It's not difficult code to write. It's just annoying that you have to type it all. And so, Visual Studio kind of just makes that easier.
I think Guthrie once said, it's like, my goal is to make you fall into the pit of success. So it just seemed like the tools headed that way, right? They were just the easiest path of using this tool now is having these best practices. Does it just mean that the tool's gotten way more opinionated?
I don't know about that. I mean, you could still write code that doesn't follow these practices just fine. It's not forcing you to do it this way, using dependency injection, for example. But it certainly makes it easier to fall into the pit of success, and that's a phrase I like as well. I also, in how you architect your code, it's a good idea for you to make it so doing the right thing is easy and the wrong thing is hard.
Right, and this gets back to like writing testable code in the first place.
Yes, and one of the things that you can do to make the wrong thing hard is make it so that dependency on direct implementation details should be in a project that you cannot reference from places where you don't want that dependency.
Yeah.
So, you set up your project structure, and this is where the clean architecture stuff really starts to come into play, so that you can't have your business logic depend on your database, because you have the project where the data access is depending on your business logic instead of the other way around. And so if you have a developer that, is in some business logic and they realize they need to go fetch something from the database, they can't just new up a new, SQL data reader or, the repository or whatever the type might be. They're forced to use some other technique, to use dependency injection and an interface and let that all be resolved at runtime. And that results in a more loosely coupled type of code that's way easier to unit test and has more seams where you can break it apart into different modules. So on the topic of clean architecture, I don't know if you two are aware, but I have a solution template out there on GitHub at /ardalis/clean architecture.
Okay.
And I call it a solution template because Visual Studio, they have all kinds of project templates that they've never really shipped an easy way to do solution templates where you just say file new solution and it creates all these things for you. So the closest I've gotten is to create this GitHub repo that then anyone can download or clone, and then just change the name of everything and make that your project. And it gives you a starter essentially with all the projects you need to start building something using the clean architecture for ASP.NET Core.
And specifically for ASP.NET Core. So, I mean, I got to think when you get into these kinds of architectural decisions, you need to be opinionated about what tools you're using.
In this case, it's definitely for ASP.NET Core. I mean, I could create a separate one that was for, ASP.NET MVC or Web API or what have you. And it would just, lay out all the basics for you. But since most of what I'm doing is ASP.NET Core these days, that's where I'm investing.
So where do your opinions show? What decisions are you making here in terms of making a clean architecture?
Well, one of the biggest ones is what are the projects and how are they related? And then the second one to that is what goes into each project. And so essentially for the actual application, I always have 3 projects for anything that's non-trivial, like beyond a Hello World app. And those are a core project. Mm-hmm. And in the ebook that I wrote for Microsoft, we call that the application core project, mostly because sometime after I started writing that book was when Microsoft decided to name .NET Core and ASP.NET Core from what they were previously calling it. So just in the interests of not making that word be too overloaded, but it is the center of your app.
Yeah, it's what everything shares.
Yes. And it's where all the most important part of your application logic should live, right? That's where your business logic should be. That's where your entities that represent the things that you're modeling in your application should be defined. And that's where the lion's share of your interfaces and abstractions that other parts of your application will use should be defined.
Steve, hold that thought for just a minute while we take a moment to hear this very important message. Hey, guess what, Rockheads? Progress Telerik wants to send someone to build. So they're having a contest. Step 1 is to sign up and learn about the new innovative modern UI tools they'll be announcing at Build. By registering, you'll be entered to win a full conference pass to Microsoft Build plus a $500 travel stipend. They're also giving away 3 Telerik DevCraft UI licenses. And for .NET Rocks listeners, they'll also be giving away a Telerik DevCraft UI license every week. All you have to do is register at buildcontest.pwop.me That's buildcontest.pwop.me. Progress offers the leading platform for developing and deploying mission-critical business applications. The creator of the award-winning Telerik.net and Kendo UI, JavaScript user interface components and controls, reporting solutions, and productivity tools, Progress offers all the tools developers need to build high-performant, modern apps with outstanding UI. Go now to buildcontest.pwop.me and sign up to win. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks, Carl Franklin, Richard Campbell, and we're here with our friend Steve Smith, who's talking about clean architecture. So you were saying about your 3 projects.
That's right. So in the core project, you've got all your business logic. The most important thing to remember about this core project is nothing else. It doesn't depend on anything else
Right.
if you can help it. So it depends on the framework, .NET Framework or .NET Core, but it doesn't depend on SQL Server or the networking stack or your file system or any type of external infrastructure type stuff. That all goes in another project, which I call infrastructure. So the infrastructure project is the second project in the solution, and it depends on the core project. Inside the infrastructure project, you're going to put all your implementations of anything that needs to talk to outside resources, like databases and web services and file systems. And these classes that you're going to write will implement interfaces that are defined in core.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure project has a project reference and a dependency on the core project, because that's where those interfaces are defined.
Right.
Okay.
And then, in theory, if you needed to change the infrastructure, you're only changing in this one place. The rest of the app doesn't care.
Right.
Yeah, and it makes it really easy for you to change on the fly even how your application is sort of stitched together at runtime. A very common thing that folks will do when they want to improve the performance of their application is add some data caching. And if you have the infrastructure project separated and you have your data access code in, let's say, repositories inside that project, and now you want to add caching, you can just write a new repository that does the caching and then have it call into the actual repository that does the data access. And it can just sort of sit on top of that as a decorator or a proxy pattern. And then in your application's startup, wherever you wire up all these dependencies, you can decide whether or not to use that caching implementation or not. And so you could do performance testing and see what kind of performance do we get with no caching,
Right.
and then plug that caching layer in, run your tests again, and see what impact those have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, yeah, I'd love to do the kind of test where it's like, let's stop decomposing our objects into rows and columns in SQL Server and start stashing it in a document store
Exactly.
like Raven or Mongo or Cosmos DB. Like just being able to have a confidence that you could do that experiment in a short amount of time, do no harm, and be able to measure it meaningfully.
Right. Yes. And the really cool thing about this particular type of building applications is that most of the time when you're adding functionality or even fixing a bug, you should be doing that inside of a new class.
Right.
And the benefit of writing your code inside of new classes is that nothing else is calling it yet. It didn't exist before, so you're not breaking anybody. And so that's very liberating, especially if you're a maintenance developer who's used to trying to find the line of code inside the 400 long line method that you need to change. Like if you're writing a new class, you have no constraints as long as you're probably complying to whatever interface that class has to return ultimately. You can implement things however you want, and you can start to take a legacy code base and start cleaning it up and moving it toward one that's more testable by putting your new functionality and your bug fixes into new classes.
Right. That's super smart. And what's interesting is you're still talking about end-tier applications, but you're no longer just defining tiers by those roles so much as it's the separation of concerns.
Sure. And more importantly, I think the direction in which the dependencies flow. So let me wrap up with the third project that I have inside my clean architectures, and that will be the user interface project. And in this case, it's an ASP.NET app, so it's a web project is what I call it. And so that's where you'll have your ASP.NET Core stuff, and you'd have your controllers and views, or your API controllers, or if you're using Razor Pages, your Razor Pages would live there. Now, looking at the dependencies then inside that project, you would have the UI project or the web project will depend on core, because those controllers and other things are going to need some way to get to data or to call business level services that they're going to use. And so the interfaces that define that data access or those services, they're all defined inside of core. And the entities and the business objects that your web application is going to use, those are defined in core as well. So web definitely has to have a dependency on the core project. The other dependency that it might have is on the infrastructure project where the actual implementation lives. And typically, to make things easy, I'll make that a project reference in Visual Studio so that when you build, it does everything correctly.
Because my instinct would say I want to avoid a relationship with the infrastructure implementation if I can, that I only care about talking to the core.
Correct. You're saying, I think you're saying exactly what I'm saying. You want to avoid that dependency from web to infrastructure. The one place where you need to know about it is when you're starting up the application and you're telling the application how to register the services that it's going to use.
Okay.
And in ASP.NET Core, that all happens typically inside of the startup.cs class. Mm-hmm. So if you were to look at a solution or look at a web project rather, and search through all the different files, the only place where you should see something that's using infrastructure namespaces or types should be in that startup.cs. Now, you can actually take it a step further and get rid of that project reference entirely, but then it makes it a little more complicated to do your application startup. You just have to use some reflection to load that infrastructure DLL, copy it and load it, and then do that service registration using reflection instead of being able to use the strongly typed.
But if your only dependency is the startup CS, that's a pretty good encapsulation of the problem.
Yeah, and that's why I don't usually bother with the reflection way. The one benefit that you would get, stepping back to what we were just talking about with making the wrong thing hard, is that you would make it basically impossible for some new developer on the team to go into a controller and just new up a repository or new up your entity framework DB context, define that type that's defined in infrastructure, and start using it.
Right.
The only way they could do that is to add that reference, and hopefully inside of your code review or your pull request, you'd see that reference being added and say, wait, we don't want that reference.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would be nice about it. It's justify that reference.
Sure.
But, we talk about useful parts of code reviews. This whole, every time we add a reference, did we really need to do that? What was it there? Well, why do we need this?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, that's a major... potentially a major change to the architecture of your application is every time you add a reference or change how the projects are organized to one another. So it should definitely be worth at least a second glance by someone on the team when someone's trying to do that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that we've pretty much led off this conversation with, I really don't want to take that dependency. What do we got to do to stop that dependency from happening? And just because you knew when you took that dependency, you're going to only reference it in startup doesn't mean that somebody less experienced isn't going to go, oh, I have that reference. I'm going to do this over here.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah. It's time to divide today's joke into 3 parts. Core, which establishes the premise. Infrastructure, which contains all the standard gags. And the user interface, which are the words that I say that make you laugh. See, it's still not funny. Proving that the proper architecture doesn't mean your end product will work.
I'm sorry, that's actually pretty funny.
Yeah, that's actually a good one.
And it may not be funny, but at least it's repeatable.
That's right. At least it's testable.
That's it.
It's actually time to give away a DevExpress subscription from our good friends at DevExpress to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Everyone knows that DevExpress has great desktop controls and tools, but their web tools are simply amazing. They have this collection of HTML5 JavaScript controls called DevExtreme. And at the heart of this product line are these really powerful controls like grid, chart, and pivot grid, and tree list, and scheduler. But DevExtreme also comes with more than 50 touch-optimized client-side controls, data visualizers, navigators, editors, lists, dialogues, and notification controls, and general-purpose controls like a filter builder, range slider, file uploader, scroll view, and more. And since they're all HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS, they include integrations with things like jQuery, Knockout, React, Ionic, and Angular. Plus, DevExtreme controls come with ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Core wrappers, so they're infinitely flexible. But don't take our word for it. Go for a test drive at dx.dotnetrocks.com. That's dx.dotnetrocks.com.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Louise Fisher.
Congratulations, Louise.
Yes.
Golf clap for you.
Golf clap for Louise. She just won the DExperience subscription, a big pile of awesome from our friends at DevExpress, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you'd like to join the fan club, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and you're in. Every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors, and every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the fan club, but you got to sign up to win. And all right, Steve, it's been a while. If you had $5,000 to spend on technology, what would you buy?
I'm still waiting to get that Tesla, and if I do enough shows and rack up enough 5K wish lists, I might have enough.
You're up to the windshield now.
Nice.
No, I think what I would get right now, I think I'm looking to upgrade my desktop developer rig and get something that has a lot more RAM and maybe just a couple of video cards that are more modern. My desktop machines are all like 3-4 years old, so they're struggling to run Docker and Kubernetes and some of the newer virtualized environments.
Right.
So,
And that whole thing was supposed to be lighter weight, so it wouldn't be so hard on your machine.
yeah, but you got to have the right CPU architecture to support the virtualization, and that's where my one main machine in my office it won't run Docker. And I have to remote into another machine to be able to even run Docker.
I'm holding back on buying CPUs right now just because there are going to be fixes to Meltdown and Spectre in the next rev or so, and this is kind of it's a good time to wait.
I'm still holding out, but the day is coming soon when I will need that new hardware, and since I don't think I'll spend the whole $5K on a new developer machine, I'll maybe look at getting the HoloLens too to play with.
Ah, very good, very good.
Yeah,
I love my HoloLens.
Is there another HoloLens coming out?
Well, they say by the end of the year they should have something. But Alex Kipman didn't, publicly announce a date.
I gotta think we're gonna hear a bunch of stuff at Build. I mean, these shows coming out just a couple of weeks before Build, so for sure, you gotta think there'll be some good stuff at Build.
Yep.
Not that we know anything.
No, we don't know anything.
No, but we're hoping.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are due for a new HoloLens for sure, and hopefully it's less than $3,000.
Steve, I have a question for you. It's been my experience that if I'm relying on components, whether they're open source components, whether they're, tools that we're using that are paid, third-party tools, it's always better, and you can avoid a lot of problems by using the source projects in your project, and instead of just taking an assembly and linking that in and adding a reference to an assembly in .NET. I've undone a whole bunch of problems that I had in Visual Studio by doing that. And it's not just because you have control over the source and you can find bottlenecks and things, but it's just cleaner. You just don't have any of these compile issues or version issues or those kinds of things that you do otherwise.
So you're saying if you're depending on a third-party component, I assume it must be open source, that you would not want to take a dependency on their packaged release or their NuGet package or whatever it might be. And instead just pull their source onto your local machine and keep it up to date.
Yes, I've had better luck doing that whenever I can, and have been bitten by what's going on in here. Why isn't this working? Oh, well, if we remove that and replace it with the source version of it, everything works better.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've had mixed luck with that. There are problems either way you go. Typically, I go the other way just out of, just convention and ease of use. Is I'll use the NuGet package. Definitely before NuGet was popular, your approach was had all the benefits and very few downsides, I think. But now with NuGet and with its versioning capabilities and stuff, I tend to use NuGet more and more, and I think part of that too is that with .NET Core, dependencies by default are on NuGet packages.
Yeah.
More so than on assembly. So even within companies, I'm seeing a lot of companies go to having their shared code that many projects use, deploying that using a NuGet package strategy, so that applications that are using them can just depend on a particular version and then pick and choose when they want to update. Whereas in the past, before they made that change, they did exactly what you're saying. They'd have maybe a dozen different applications that all had as part of their solution this shared library that everybody used.
Yeah.
And when they would do a get latest, if somebody had to make a breaking change to that shared library, now all those projects would get the latest and all their solutions would fail at the same time.
Right.
And they'd have to invest in fixing all of them at once.
Right.
When really maybe half of them or most of them don't care about that change. It could have just kept running on the previous version.
Right.
So that's the downside. The upside is, if you want to be able to debug through that source code, it's way easier if you've got it in your project.
Right. Sure. Yeah, and I found that especially when mixing versions of .NET, let's say you have something that was compiled in .NET 2.5 or 3.5, you have stuff that was compiled in 4, and your project is using the latest. That I had a big project that I had to deconstruct that way, and that was the only way to make things work.
Yeah,
well.
And that can definitely be a pain, because a lot of times they have that dependency on a particular version because something in there needs it, but maybe it's not the thing that you're using.
Right.
And so if you can just pull out that code, then you'll be able to put it into something that uses whatever framework you're using, and you'll be fine.
Right.
Hopefully Net Standard makes that a little easier.
Yep.
And speaking back to clean architecture, Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin, has a recent book out called Clean Architecture, and he reviews some of his principles for components in there. There's 3 of them. There's a reuse, release, equivalence. There's the common closure principle, common reuse principle.
Right.
And one of the things that these principles guide you toward is packaging up your things that change together and things that are unrelated to one another, put those in a different package. And so one of the pain points you're feeling is someone, and it might have been Microsoft, I don't know, put too many things together that all have a common dependency on this framework version, when in fact some of that stuff could have just been in a separate package that you could have depended on, and it wouldn't have had that dependency, and it would have saved you some pain.
Right. Yeah.
So again, Net Standard, I hope, starts to fix that problem, where you're not dependent on a particular package or library is not dependent on a specific implementation of .NET, but instead is just saying, hey, I implement this particular standard, this particular version of Net Standard. And so you should be able to take those dependencies on those types of libraries much easier in the future once that becomes the standard.
So, I mean, .NET Standard's at 2.0. They're already talking about a 2.1. Like, what would you be looking in this standard that would make this less painful?
Well, if, let's say, I don't know what type of thing Carl's code was depending on inside of this library that was using .NET 3.5, but let's say that it wasn't doing anything crazy with specific APIs or libraries that were talking to infrastructure. Let's say it was mostly just doing logic in memory, right? Maybe it was like datetime code or something. Well, that type of stuff is not going to require a very high level of Net Standard. Like Net Standard starts at like 1.0 and works its way up, and each additional level basically encompasses a larger surface area of API. Right. So they could have, whoever it is that he was depending on, they might have taken all of their stuff that didn't depend on high levels of the standard and put that into its own package, its own component or NuGet package, that maybe targeted Net Standard 1.0 or 1.6 or something very, very small.
Yeah.
And then he could have easily taken that into his project and not had to worry about its other dependencies that it might have had.
Yeah, it turned out to be just one assembly that was the problem, but it was several layers deep. And in order to get to that, we had to get the source code of all of the other components that were calling on it and using it. And that's when we found the problem.
Sure, and I'll bet there wasn't a lot of abstraction there or seams where you could have injected in your own implementation of that thing that it was depending on.
Absolutely not. No, it was locked up.
Yeah, and that's what you get if you don't follow this approach. of using abstractions and using dependency injection, you'll end up with code that's tightly coupled, and the path of execution is identical to the path of compilation. And that's one of the things that I talk about in my talks and workshops is if you follow this loosely coupled clean architecture approach, you can compile against abstractions, and then your path of execution is flexible. You can decide which object graph you want to use at runtime, and you can pick and choose, which implementations to use. That makes it way easier to test your code. It also makes it way easier for your code to adapt to change over time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you've always been a really strong advocate of DDD. Is there anything specific into your template in this approach that are very DDD, or could I be more of a test-driven design guy or other approaches and still the architecture makes sense to me?
Yeah, clean architecture is the architecture that DDD promotes or espouses in the book.
Right,
I don't think it had that name at the time, but that's the basic architecture. My template that you can grab off of GitHub does have some DDD things in it. It has support for entities, value objects. Those are the basic building blocks of most DDD models. It also has support for domain events, which is a very useful design pattern that DDD talks about. And it's a way for you to have code such as in your entities raise an event to say that something happened, and then you can write handlers for those events that will do whatever follow-on work or logic needs to occur when that happens. And it's a great way for you to separate when something happens from things that need to occur as a result of it. And so I put that implementation into this sample just so it's there and folks can use it if they want. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I have in my labs that I do in my workshop, we add some additional DDD stuff like aggregates and specifications. And there's another project on my GitHub which is called DDD-guestbook, and we can include a link to it in the show notes if you want. But that basically adds on these additional patterns and is the lab that I use in my workshops.
Awesome.
Where do you fall on the whole test-driven development side? Because we've been having conversations with different groups around these things, and both seem to have merit. But I presume there's no one right way. But how do you feel about test-driven development?
I'm a fan of test-driven development, and certainly it's not an alternative to DDD. I think DDD has a whole different scope than TDD.
Right.
Right. DDD talks a lot about like how you're going to work with the customer and how you're going to have a common language and model things. And you can certainly write all of your DDD code using TDD if you're so inclined.
Right.
My approach is that I have written enough code using TDD, and I do deliberate practice on doing that using katas and other things where I know how to write testable code. So I can write testable code without writing the tests. And then anytime I start to get stuck, or I'm not sure what to do, or I'm not sure about how to implement something where there's actual complexity, then I'll write the test first. Mm-hmm. Or I'll write the test, immediately after, and then, probably from that point start writing the test first. So it's more of a tool in my tool belt at this point that I pull out when I need it, which is basically any time there's real complexity. But I don't TDD every, auto property on every class, right? Like the stuff that I know can't break because it's a built-in feature. I'm not trying to get to 100% test coverage just to check the block.
No, that totally makes sense to me, and I appreciate your sort of thinking around the fact that these are not mutually exclusive concepts, even though they have similar names. They are shareable, and I have read through your notes on the clean architecture template, and you do have a test project, which means there's no reason I couldn't be writing tests as I went before I wrote the code, just because for exactly that reason. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, so let's work on the test plan first. That'll help me think clearly about how I actually want to do something.
Correct. Yeah, and I probably should have mentioned that there is also that test project. So thank you. And the other cool thing that's in that test project that's not specific to TDD, but I think it's worth mentioning for folks that are coming from ASP.NET and haven't yet started doing stuff with Core, is ASP.NET Core is way easier to do integration testing or functional testing on than ASP.NET previous was.
Yeah. Whether
it was web forms or MVC. So in this sample, you'll see how you can write tests that run in memory super fast. Don't have to have a IIS installed or have ports open on your firewall or any of that stuff. Just runs against this test server in memory, and spits back responses from your application that you can then make assertions against. So very easy to test MVC, ASP.NET Core, MVC, or Razor Page, or API applications using this functionality.
Now, let's say you have a customer you're doing something for, and you've done a lot of projects in the past with them. They exclusively use, let's say it's Azure SQL, right, as their data platform. And are you going to go to the extra effort of building a data repository project for them? Isn't that sort of trying to predict the future?
Absolutely, I will.
Yeah.
And not because I think that they're necessarily going to ever change how they do their data access, but because I want to have the flexibility of changing, how I do that access, maybe for tests. That's
okay. Sure.
Usually, you want an interface. An interface is really only valuable if it has more than one implementation.
Sure, of course.
At some point. And I have two implementations almost immediately when I have the real one that runs in production, and then my fake one or mock one or whatever in my test.
Right.
And so the fact that I'm going to write tests, or that I want to be able to write tests, justifies me putting in an interface and abstraction.
Isn't that just the difference of a connection string, though? Or are you talking about using an entirely, maybe mock objects for data that doesn't really test the data, though?
Right. Yes. I'm in the case of a unit test, I'm not trying to test the data. I'm trying to test the code that's using the data.
Yeah.
And so if I have, let's say, a controller, like for an API, and inside that controller, it, has hard-coded code to reach out to SQL Azure, grab some data and bring it back, and then perform some logic on it, and then return some subset of that data based on some custom logic.
Sure. If
I want to unit test that, or even write, a functional test, and I don't want to rack up my Azure SQL bill every time I run this test, or I want to be able to test it fast and not have a dependency on the cloud, I'm going to want to be able to replace that data access code with something else. And maybe I want to test it with a whole bunch of different kinds of data. I don't want to have to rebuild the data inside my Azure SQL storage just because I want to be able to test this with a dozen different types of sets of data, right?
But I guess, when I'm thinking of doing the simplest thing that works, to me, I would have a local, SQL Express or something like that, which I can point to just, with the constructor, just change out the connection string instead of requiring a repository, which has, a different data interface and different shape to it. That's what I'm thinking.
Sure.
Would you start with that approach, and then at a later time, if it turns out that you need to have more flexibility, would that be the wrong time to add a repository to this solution?
That would not be. I would not argue with someone for taking that approach. It's not the approach I would take, because not early on in a given project, but early on in my career, that was the approach that I always took, because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And what happens very quickly is when you start using a local database for all of your testing, you have to write a lot of scripts to reset that database back to a known good state, and then initialize it with all the data that all your tests need.
Sure.
And generally, all your tests are going to be dependent on that script. And so when you add a new test that maybe needs to change something about that data, it might end up breaking a bunch of other tests because they all depended on that data being in a particular state when it started up.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe you had an API method that, expects that when you call the list method, it returns 2 rows.
Yep.
And then now you've got a new test that needs a different type of data, so you add another row. Well, you make your test pass, but now that old test that was testing that list returns 2 rows breaks because now there's 3 rows.
Sure.
And so that's sort of a testing anti-pattern, that one test is breaking other tests, not when it's actually running, but when you're trying to write the test.
Yeah.
And it's because they're all dependent on that single test database.
Right.
Whereas if you used something like a repository, you could just inject in a fake implementation or a mock of that one method, that list method on that repository, and just say, hey, it returns this new list of whatever, new list of T with these things in it. And now in some other place where I need it to return something else, well, I can just tell it right there inside the test, return something else.
Yeah.
And those 2 tests have no dependency on one another. And so it evolves a little better. And those tests will run a lot faster because they're not actually having to reach out a process and talk to a database and then having to, destroy and recreate that database between every single test. So yes, you can do that, and that would be what I would consider an integration test approach, not a unit test approach.
Right.
And integration tests absolutely have value, and you should write those. But my rule for testing is, first of all, unit tests are tests that only test your code. They don't test anything that's out of process or infrastructure. And the rule for saying whether or not you should write a unit test or an integration test should be, can I test this particular thing with a unit test?
Right.
If the answer is yes, then write a unit test.
Right.
If you can't, if you want to test, like, does my repository actually return data from a SQL database? You can't test that with a unit test. That's where you write the integration test.
Right.
But the unit tests are the fastest, cheapest thing to write. So whatever you can test with a unit test, test it that way, and reserve the more expensive integration tests for things that you can't test with unit tests.
Okay.
Is my advice.
Everything you say is such common sense, I mean, it's just thinking these things through and doing, as you say, the simplest thing that works that isn't going to come back to bite you later. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. That's been years of me beating my head against walls that's now being used to share with other people.
Yeah, and it's so useful. It's so useful to hear what other people have had to deal with, by making the decisions that they did.
I still got to think that when folks are diving into this, they can over-engineer. Like, it's easy to overthink some of these abstractions.
Mm.
That's definitely true.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, we were talking about TDD and DDD. I propose PDD, which is pain-driven development.
Yeah. That's right.
And pain-driven development basically means, don't apply a design pattern or some principle or some refactoring until it's causing you pain.
Right.
And so when you experience the pain, if you've learned about, how to do things with a design pattern or how to apply a principle or what, domain-driven design, when you feel that pain, then you have the tool set available to alleviate it. And that pain might be duplication. It might be that your tests are running slow. It might be, any number of things. But there's all these patterns and all these things that you can use to keep your code clean, that you can apply. But if you try and apply them all up front, your code's just going to be a mess and it's not going to do anything.
Right.
So you need to wait and see what the code is doing as you make it actually work and solve problems for your customer. And then apply these different approaches to keep it clean and malleable, as you see where it's flexing and where it's changing.
My Mr. Smith, I think you're presuming that we don't get everything right the first try.
I have not. That's not been my experience.
It's always a modest response from you, sir, in that sense. But I mean, at the same time, you were saying, like, there's chunks of code you know how to write that you have had experience before, and so you don't feel the need to do that test-driven development approach to validate a bunch of things. Like, that pretty much looks like this. I'm going to do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, most of the unit tests that I write are for code that has conditionals in it.
Right.
If I look at code and it has a cyclomatic complexity of 1, meaning there's only one pathway through there, it generally doesn't require much in the way of a unit test because it can only do one thing. And if it's wrong, it should be pretty obvious that it's wrong.
Right.
And if it's got a bug in something else that it's calling, well, then the unit test for those things, those dependencies, will flush out those issues.
Yeah.
Cool.
Is there anything else that we missed that you want to talk about? I know you could talk about this stuff forever, but we're coming about to the end of the show. But there's room for a shout out or some resources or a last point that you want to make?
I did want to make sure and mention, again, I have a weekly dev tips podcast and newsletter that you can find either at weeklydevtips.com for the podcast or at ardallas.com/tips for the email. And actually, this week will be my 2-year anniversary of sending out an email with a new tip every Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. So that 2-year anniversary one will be there by the time this show airs.
And I have heard it, and it's very good. Go check it out. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
it's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Carl and Richard. Talk to you later.
Okay, and we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and, of course, in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a